Daf Yomi Tractate, Sanhedrin, page 62b, top of the page with the words Hachi Tana Kame. This is the brayta that Rabbi Zakkai taught before Rabbi Yochanan. Chomer b'Shabbos b'Shar Mitzvos, Chomer b'Shar Mitzvos b'Shabbos, Chomer b'Shabbos asa shtayim behelem echad, chayiv al kol achad v'achad ma she'en ken b'Shar Mitzvot, Chomer b'Shar Mitzvot, שבשאר מצוות שהגלגלו מתכוון חייב, מה שאין כן בשבת. This is the brayta that Rabbi Zakkai taught before Rabbi Yochanan. There is a stringency with regard to Shabbat vis-a-vis other mitzvot, and conversely there is a stringency with regard to other mitzvot vis-a-vis Shabbat. There is a stringency with regard to Shabbat as with regard to Shabbat. If one performed two distinct acts of labor in one lapse of awareness, he is obligated to bring a sin offering for each and every act, which is not so with regard to other mitzvot. Conversely, there is a stringency with regard to other mitzvot. As with regard to other mitzvot, if one sin unwittingly, without intent to perform the act of the transgression at all, he is nevertheless obligated to bring an offering, which is not so with regard to Shabbat. Amar Mar Chomer v'Shabbat שהשבת זה שתיים וכולי היחידה מאילי ודעבד קציר ותחינה לחבטה כבשאר מצוות ואכל חלב דם הכה תרתי מחייב והכה תרתי מחייב. The Gemara examined this brayta in detail. The Master said, there is a stringency with regard to Shabbat. As with regard to Shabbat, if one performed two distinct acts of labor in one lapse of awareness, he is obligated to bring a sin offering for each act. What are the circumstances? If we say that he unwittingly performed acts of reaping and grinding on Shabbat, the corresponding situation with regard to other mitzvot in the case where one unwittingly consumed forbidden fat and blood. If so, there is no difference between Shabbat and the other mitzvot. Here, one is obligated to bring two sin offerings, and there one is obligated to bring two sin offerings. לגבי שאר מצוות אינו חייב אלא אחס היחידה מאידך חלב וחלב דעשה לגבי חבס דעבד קצירה הכה אחד חייב והכה אחד חייב. Rather, what are the circumstances with regard to other mitzvot where one is obligated to bring only one sin offering? One is obligated in a case where he consumed forbidden fat and again consumed forbidden fat with one lapse of awareness. The corresponding situation with regard to Shabbat is a case where one performed an act of reaping and performed another act of reaping within one lapse of awareness. In that case, too, there is no difference between Shabbat and other mitzvot. Here, one is obligated to bring one sin offering, and there, one is obligated to bring one sin offering. The Gemara comments, and this is the reason that Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Zakkai, go out and teach this brayta outside. It is not worthy of being taught in the study hall. My kushya dilma la'olam ema lecha david kasira techina ma she'en ken v'shar mitzvahis asa l'bayzor ked Rabbi Ami david Rabbi Ami zibach b'kiter nisach behelem echad eno chayv el achas. The Gemara asks, what is the difficulty that caused Rabbi Yochanan to disregard the brayta? Actually, perhaps I will say to you that the brayta is referring to a case where one performed acts of reaping and grinding on Shabbat, and when the brayta states, which is not so with regard to other mitzvot, it is not referring to all mitzvot in general. Rather, we arrive at the halacha of idol worship in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Ami. As Rabbi Ami says, if one sacrificed an animal as an idolatrous offering and burned incense and poured a libation, all in the course of one lapse of awareness, he is obligated to bring only one sin offering. Lo mitokma בעבודה זרה, דקטוני ספר, חומר בשאר מצוות, בשאר מצוות שגג, ולא מתכוון חייב. The Gemara answers, the Braita cannot be interpreted as referring to idol worship, as it teaches in the last clause. There is stringency with regard to other mitzvot, as with regard to other mitzvot, if one sin unwittingly without the intent to perform the act at all, he is nevertheless obligated to bring an offering. הרי ליבו לשמיים, אלא לחזה אינדרתה וסגיד לה, יקבלה עלה בלוה מזידו, ואי לא יקבלה עלה, לא כלום היא. The Gemara explains why this cannot be referring to idol worship. What are the circumstances of one who unwittingly transgresses the prohibition of idol worship without the intent to perform the act? If he thought that a house of idol worship was a synagogue and bowed to it, he is certainly exempt, as his heart was directed towards heaven. Rather, it must be a case where the transgressor saw the statue of a person and bowed to it. If he accepted that person upon himself as a god, he is an intentional transgressor and is liable to receive the death penalty not to bring an offering. And if he did not accept upon himself as a god, what he did is nothing. Rather, the Braita must be referring to a case where one worshipped an idol due to love or fear to a person, and he was unaware that this is prohibited. This works out well according to Abaye, who says that one engages in idol worship due to love or fear is liable. Accordingly, one who does so unwillingly must bring an offering. But according to Rava, who says that one who does so is exempt, what can be said? Rather, the Braita must be referring to a case where the transgressor says to himself that idol worship is permitted in general. Accordingly, the statement in the Braita, which is not so in the Halakha Shabbat, is referring to one who is under the impression that performing labor on Shabbat is permitted. One who performs prohibited labor under those circumstances is completely exempt, while one who transgresses under those circumstances with regard to idol worship, one is obligated to bring a sin offering. Ad kan lo ba'mine Rav Amara Rav Nachman Helem ze v'ze ela I l'chayim v'chadam I l'chayim v'tarati pater l'gamri l'kan l'man amar. This interpretation of the Braita is difficult, as Rava asked Rav Nachman about the halacha in a case where one violated Shabbat during a lapse of awareness of both this, that it was Shabbos, and that the particular labor that he performed is prohibited on Shabbat, prohibited on Shabbos. And Rava's question was only with regard to whether to deem that person obligated to bring one sin offering, or whether to deem him obligated to bring two sin offerings. There is no one who says that such a person is entirely exempt, in accordance with this interpretation of the Braita. Therefore, the Braita cannot be referring to idol worship. My kushya dilma leoilam emalach reisha ba'odazav sefer b'shar mitzvos. The Gemara challenges this conclusion. What is the difficulty in interpreting the Braita as referring to idol worship? Actually, perhaps I will say to you that the first clause of the Braita is referring to the contrast between Shabbat and idol worship, and the last clause is referring to the contrast between Shabbat and other mitzvot. V'shavar b'loi miskavin d'kasavar roik hu uvla'o. Ma she'en kein b'Shabbat d'patur. She'eskavin l'agbia es ha'talush v'chatach es ha'mechubar patur. And the halacha of one who transgressed other mitzvot unwittingly without intent to perform the act is referring, for example, to a case where one has forbidden fat in his mouth and thinks it is spittle and swallows it. In that case, he must bring an offering for his transgression, which is not so with regard to the halacha of Shabbat, where a parallel case, one will be exempt. As, for example, one who intended to lift a plant that was detached from the ground and mistakenly severed a plant still attached to the ground is exempt. One is not liable for an unintentional act of labor on Shabbat. Kid Rav Nachman Mishmul Amar Mesasik B'chalav U'arayus Chayev Shekain Nehenet Mesasik B'Shabbos Pasir Melechas Machshavas Asar Torah. And this distinction, in accordance with the statement of that Rav Nachman says, that Shmuel says, as he says, one who acts unawares with forbidden fats or with those with whom sexual relations are forbidden, for example, one who accidentally consumed forbidden fat or engaged in forbidden sexual intercourse without intending to perform the act at all, see Yevamot 54a, is obligated to bring a sin offering, since he derived pleasure from the transgression. But one who acts unawares on Shabbat, performing a forbidden labor, is exempt, as the Torah prohibits only planned labor. Rabbi Yochanan the Tamei B'chol Mokim Basnisa Reisha B'chad Taima V'Sefer B'chad Taima. Since the price can be explained in this manner, the Gemara explains why Rabbi Yochanan rejected it anyway. Rabbi Yochanan conforms to a standard line of reasoning in that he does not interpret the first clause of a Braita with one explanation and the last clause of the same Braita with the other explanation. Rabbi Yochanan does not accept the premise that a Braita can be referring to a different matter in each clause unless it states so explicitly. Rabbi Yochanan, Man Mitargim Li Chavis Ali Ben Chatana, Rabbi Yochanan says, whoever explains to me the Mishnah concerning a barrel, in Baba Tzia 40b, in accordance with the opinion of one Tana, I will carry his clothes after him to the bathhouse. In other words, I will tend him as a servant, as although that Mishnah can be explained by dividing it into two different opinions, I do not accept that type of explanation. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan does not accept the suggestion that the first clause of the Braita here is referring to idol worship, and the last clause is referring to other mitzvot. Gufa, the Gemara discusses the matter above, namely, whether one who engages in several forms of idol worship in the same lapse of awareness brings more than one sin offering.